Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Tin Man Collections. And today I'll be reading another chapter out of the North Carolina Ghost and Legends book by Nancy Roberts. And this chapter is called The Unearthly Music of Roan Mountain. So be ready to be spooked. Alright, let's get to it. Once upon a time, there was a man who had all of the things most men spend themselves for. First of all, he could number among his list of acquaintances many of the most famous men of his day. Why? At any moment, even here in the fashionable seclusion of his mountain home, the phone might ring and the voice of a publisher, politician, or other prominent friend would come warmly over the wires seeking him out. Must be a very popular fellow. Anyway, here we go. A writer such as he had much to contribute, especially now that his position in the literary world was secure. His most prosaic utterances were received as controversial gems. Even his physical presence was a contribution in the eyes of many, for certainly such a distinguished guest enhanced his host's prestige, and unsure of personal worth. How much better to huddle close to those who have arrived? Lamont Duval, and we will call him that to save possible embarrassment, had been everywhere. Just a casual reference to the countries he had visited was bound to impress. It had all been most exciting until he began to notice that hungry children were the same whether they begged on the streets of India or sat appetitively on the steps of a sharecropper's house, and that the stench of poverty was as strong in the New York slums as those of Morocco. The time he had sought the most of Richard's face which he could find to describe the man he had found was not among the gamblers at Monte Carlo, but among his own circle in the exclusive apartment house where he spent most of his winters. A vague dissatisfaction, the cause of which he could scarcely come to grips with, had become Duval's most frequent companion of late. He sat now in a comfortable chair, facing a huge expanse of plate glass which overlooked one of the most gorgeous views in the North Carolina mountains. In some towns, standing might depend on a grandfather, an address at the top of the hill, or a certain street name, but here one of the most important symbols of status was the view. And of course Lamont Duval had it. In fact, what did he not have? On his magazine table were expensive and exclusive done publications attributed to his taste. His bookshelves were lined with rare Icunabundum and first editions. I'm sorry, I couldn't pronounce that I word anyway. And now he was faced with deciding how and where he was to spend his summer. Should he be here in the mountains, or would he really prefer listening to Wagner and Bayreuth with an apartment for the summer at the Kronenberg Castle near Frankfurt, and perhaps a jaunt to the Olympic Games? Now, for me, I would rather go spend my summer in the mountains because I feel like the cold air would come in and hit you, be nice and cool, than going to the beach or something. But going to a castle, I would love to see that. Anyway, any castle will do. No haunted ones, of course. 10 years ago, he might have savored all of this to the utmost, but ever so gradually a serpent had insinuated himself into this paradise and all but ruined his capacity to enjoy it. And just what was this viper? He didn't know himself. If it had been a man of more talent, superior intellect, whose work rivaled his own, he could have adjusted to that, for he had come to accept, nay, even to thoroughly appreciate the genius of other men. Long years ago, he had renounced that illusionary and prideful struggle for recognition, but the world at the best rival. Duval had been content to work diligently in developing his own unique talent while tasting the not inconsiderable fruits of his labor. But now an honest and incisive mind had finally turned himself inward, and the picture which Duval was beginning to see of himself and his life was not altogether pleasing, although it had regarded religion with a must tolerance for the greatness part of his life. It how began to appear to him that this myth of the masses, which he had failed to pursue, had somehow began to pursue him. Yeah, if you try to go pursuing wealth, that's all that's going to be on your mind and pretty much take you over into madness, basically. But anyway, if he casually fingered a book, it would turn out to be by Phelan or perhaps Thomas A. Kempis. I don't know who them guys are, but anyway. And often it seemed that even the most impersonal conversation would turn toward religion. But the phenomenon in the book of mountain stories he was now reading were clearly of scientific origin. As long as he were here, so close to the locale he owned it to himself to investigate. The ghostly choir of Roan Mountain. Ooh. Wonder what music they play at night, but anyway. Some of the natives called it Roan Mountain. It was not a long drive, and Lamont read with fascination that on this mile-high plateau an awesome sound like wildly beautiful music had first been heard by herdsmen. This was as far back as the 1700s. Good Lord Almighty. And they're still going up there singing probably to this day, but anyway. When they told the story in the valley, they spoke of hearing a choir of angels. That sounds peaceful. As they talked, the heads of the mountain folk nodded, for hadn't some venturesome souls been caught on the Roan in a thunderstorm and seen a circular rainbow, and if God wore a halo, would it not just be just such a rainbow? Anything could happen atop the Roan. Here Lamont Duval smiled at such nativity, for he had been to many faraway lands, but never in any of them had he seen even one magic place. And yet, at the thought of magic places, some long buried emotion of his youth stirred faintly within him. He read on about John Strother, a member of a boundary surveying commission back in 1799. In his diary, Strother has written, "There is no shrubbery growing on the top of this mountain for several miles, and the wind has such power on top of the mountain that the ground it blowed in deep holes all over the northwest side." And then in 1878, Colonel John Wilder heard the music as it had been heard a century before by the herdsmen. He built a summer hotel on the Roan and passed the story along to many an interesting guest. Among those who heard of it was a young scientist from Knoxville, Tennessee, named Henry E. Colton. Colton returned home to publish a treatise. Lamont Duval read Colton's conclusions vaguely. Several of the cattle tenders up on the mountain, and also Colonel Wilder, had spoken to us about what they called mountain music. Colton wrote, "One evening they said it was sounding loud, and Dr. D.P. Boynton of Knoxville, HON. J.M. Thornburg, and myself accompanied General Wilder to the glen to hear it. The sound was very plain to the ear. It was always loudest and most prolonged just after there would be a thunderstorm in either valley or one passing over the mountain. I used every argument I could to persuade myself that it simply was a result of some common cause and to shake the faith of the country people in its mysterious origin. If I heard music on top of a mountain, it's probably in the religious, ghostly, spiritual sense. Ain't no scientific thing about it right there. But I wonder if I could probably play Alabama's mountain music song up there and be like, louder than that. But Oh, play me some mountain music. You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden that starts happening. But that's just me. But cool to see. But anyway, where am I at? They continue believing that the music came from angels, but I only convinced myself that it was the result from two currents of air meeting each other in the suck between the two peaks where there was no obstruction of trees, one containing a greater, the other a lesser amount of electricity. Here Lamont Duval put down the book with sudden decision. This very afternoon he would learn the truth for himself. He noted the black clouds overhead, and an occasional raindrop made a shiny little path as it slid down the outside of the wall of glass before him. Without waiting for his resolve to waver he strode out of the house and, getting into a small foreign-made car, headed toward Roan Mountain. When he reached the mountain, he drove almost to its top, parked his car, and began walking toward the crest of the plateau. In a few minutes, he saw a line of rocks which he guessed to be where the foundation of Colonel John Wilder's hotel had been. But now the rain was a steady downpour, beating against his face with almost primeval force. Stumbling, he caught himself at the edge of the rocky promontory and decided to take shelter under his overhang. If it was windy or something, I would be grabbing onto something quick. But anyway, for almost a half hour, he sat there waiting for the rain to stop. Soaked to the skin, as he rested, he began to berate himself for its foolishness, for there was certainly no music of any kind to be heard, only the pounding of the torrential rain. Then, as he strained to hear the slightest unusual noises, his ears caught a faint sound. The rain stopped as if at the signal of some unseen hand, and the sun drifted brittlely from behind the cloud. Then he heard the sound again, and more clearly. Gradually it gained in intensity, and what had first seemed to him to be merely the wind took on new tones, like a choir of many voices. Wildly sweet, it built up to a shattering crescendo of sound, which caught him and flowed over him. He listened incredulously, forgetting his damp discomfort. As he did so, something indescribable began to take place within Lamont Duval. Oriental women of old bound their feet, and so had the world placed fetter after fetter around Duval's spirit. Now it seemed as if one by one they were being unwound and swept away. Finally all was quiet, and Lamont Duval, emotionally exhausted and utterly bewildered by the fierce beauty of the music, still made no move to rise. Then he climbed cautiously back up upon the rocks above him. His eyes searched the sky for more storm clouds. They had completely disappeared, but to his astonishment there was something else in their place. At the edge of the plateau was the most gorgeous rainbow he had ever beheld. Blue, yellow, pale green, and cirrus. It shimmered high in the sky, and what was most amazing of all, the rainbow formed a complete circle. He remembered the words God's halo, and as he did so, his lips tried to form a smile, but they could not. He clutched desperately at the last shreds of his skepticism, but they melted away as he stood there gazing in wonderment. He began to be aware of a new sensation. Somehow he felt as new and clean as he had as a boy. Duval watched the rainbow's glory until it faded into the sky, and then, turning reluctantly, started back to his car. When he reached home, he was just in time to hear the instant ring, ring, ring of his phone. Ring, ring. Be like, hello. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway. But it could as easily have been ringing in another world or on another planet. For Lamont Duval smiled faintly and heeded it not at all, walked over to his table by the window. The book which he picked up and opened was just what he had thought it would be. The Imitation of Christ by Thomas A. Kempis. Whew. That is spooky and spiritual at the same time. But anyway, you see something that looks like a ring and you might think it's like God's halo. Take that as a sign. But anyway. All right. Done with that chapter in this book. So that's going to be it for now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those post notifications, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.